My name is Anthony Chen. I'm the director of Ilo Ilo. Please come and see this film when it opens in Colombia. It's distributed by Cineplex Colombia and supported by the National School of Cinema. The Spanish title of the film is Ilo Ilo, Retratos de Familia. I hope I pronounce it properly. And good luck to Colombia for the World Cup. I think you guys have the best soccer player in the world. Well, I started, I think, wanting to be a director at a very young age. I decided to become a filmmaker when I was 15. I went to film school at a very young age. I went to film school at 17. I went to 3-year film school in Singapore. And then later on, I made a few short films which were quite successful. And later on, I went to film school again. When I was 22, 23, I went to the National Film and Television School in the UK to do my Masters in Directing. I remember when I was 15, I was reading a lot of books on directors and filmmaking, and I remember, I was literally part of the generation that embraced the internet. And, at the time there wasn't Google, but there was Alta Vista and Yahoo, so I went online and I was finding out about film schools. I did a very naive thing of writing to a lot of film schools in America when I was like 15. I wrote to USC, I wrote to NYU, I wrote to UCLA, trying to find out, how do I get into a film school, what are the prerequisites required to be a director, and how does one build a career as a director. But then I found out that film school in America is so expensive. It was easily at the time 200,000 US. And, I come from a middle class family. We're not very rich, we're not very poor, but that's still quite a lot of money. So eventually, I found out that there was a film school in Singapore. Now we have a lot of film schools, but at that time there was only one film school. So I applied for it and started film school at 17. The Singapore film industry, it's still very young. We don't make a lot of films. We're a very small country. We have a population of 5 million people. We make about 10 to 15 films a year. Most of the films do not actually play outside of Singapore. About, if there are 10 films, about 8 to 9 of the films are usually slapstick comedies or genre films. They play to a very local audience. They're not sold or exported anywhere else, which is why you don't get to see Singapore cinema so much, internationally. I mean, there have been a few directors that have made it in terms of the art house realm. Filmmakers like Eric Koo, who has had a few films in Cannes. So in a way, a film like Ilo Ilo, it's very different from what one would expect from the usual kind of films coming out of Singapore. Is it hard to make a film in Asia? I think the interesting thing is this, because there has been, especially in China, which is not so close to Singapore, but close enough. The box office is sort of increasing and so much things are happening. I think a lot of money is flooding into the market for funding films. I would say it's easy to make a kind of very formulaic commercial sort of film, but it's probably hard to try and make an art house film in Singapore. It's not the most sophisticated kind of environment in terms of cinema, in terms of audiences appreciating cinema, or even the industry itself. You know, it's a certain kind of melodrama, it's a certain kind of slapstick comedy that the industry knows or feels could actually make back its investment at the box office. So in a way, I wouldn't say it's that hard for a young filmmaker to make a film in Singapore, because we have funding schemes. We have the Singapore Film Commission. There are grants available to support like first time, second time feature filmmakers. There are grants to support short film filmmaking. I think if you compare to the rest of the region, our neighbors like Malaysia, like Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, we have much more government funding compared to everyone else. So it's not that hard. Yeah, I guess for a young filmmaker to try, you know, to make his first feature. I've made a lot of short films as a filmmaker. Actually, I've made more than 6 short films. You know, until the time I've completed Ilo Ilo, I've made at least 10 short films. I went to film school not once but twice. I went to 3-year film school in Singapore. I went to do my master's, 2-year master's in directing in the UK. And I would say that short films form a very strong foundation for my filmmaking. I think a lot of how I could actually step up to make that first feature film was because I had a lot of experience and lessons and training through the making of short films. Of course, there are geniuses out there who could just start jumping onto that first feature, but I feel short films train you as a director in terms of understanding the language of cinema, in terms of being able to be a bit more precise in what you're trying to say, and also working with actors. I think the experience working with actors and knowing how to communicate with actors it's a good strength to build up through short films. I'm quite old school, you know. I went to a very good film school, especially later on in the UK, and I'm a big supporter of formal film school education. Not all filmmakers believe in that, but I think making shorts really do help. That being said, short films and feature films are an entirely different thing. You know, a lot of times short films is very much about that one moment in time, that one slice of life, and how you find meaning, you know, in that one little incident that happens. But a feature film, it's much bigger and wider, and it takes a lot of stamina. It takes a lot of focus. You know, even though a lot of people have said, oh, you've made a very successful first feature, but I'm not sure I actually know how to make a feature film. Not yet. I feel I'm still learning. Like, I've made so many short films, I feel I could go back today, write a short film, you know, in a night, and maybe shoot it, you know, in the next few days, and it would still work. I mean, it wouldn't be a bad short film, it would still work as a short film, but I'm not sure I can say that for a feature film. I think it's just so hard to write a feature film script. It's so hard to make a feature film, you know. On a short film, it's 3, 5, 10 shooting days at most. When you're shooting for a whole month or 6 weeks, 8 weeks on a feature film, you know, every single scene, every single shot requires so much focus, and sometimes a whole film could just fall apart because you haven't gotten hold of or you lost focus when you're working on a certain scene. Ilo Ilo is about the relationship of a 10-year-old boy and his Filipino maid. In Singapore, we have maids that we hire from overseas, from the Philippines or from Indonesia, because they're much cheaper. It's not a very bourgeois thing like in Western societies, where you have a certain class before you have a maid. But in Singapore, you hire a maid for very pragmatic reasons. In every 10 families in Singapore, about 4 to 5 would have a maid from a developing country. And Ilo Ilo really tells the story of this 10-year-old boy and the newly arrived maid called Teresa from the Philippines. And it's very much a thing of a family going through a very bad period, the Asian financial crisis of 1997. I think the idea was born in 2010. I had just graduated from my master's in film directing at the National Film School in the UK, and I knew I've made so many short films. By then I've made like, what, 6, 7, 8 short films, and I knew it was time to move on to a feature film. I had no idea what film I wanted to make at that time yet, because unlike some filmmakers, they're just full of ideas. They would walk up to a producer and sort of like pitch 10 ideas, and people would just pick and choose, and they would just make whatever film, you know, it's financeable. But for me, I don't think I actually set out to make this film. I feel like the film actually found me instead of me finding the film. In 2010, just after graduation, around April, I remember all of a sudden a lot of childhood memories came flooding into my head, and I remembered this person who was our maid working in our household when I was growing up. She came when I was 4, she left when I was 12. She was in our home for 8 years, and her name was Teresa, and we called her Auntie Terry. I think what really triggered the idea was that moment when I was 12 and we were in the airport, and I remember we were going to send her off and she's going to go home to the Philippines for good. I remember how painful that was. I was crying and crying and crying, and it was the first time as a child I had to deal with separation. And all of a sudden I was thinking, like, why would a child feel so much for someone who isn't really part of the family, who's just a servant, who's a stranger, who's from somewhere else? It picked a lot of questions in my head. I just felt like there was a story in there, and I went on to pursue that. So I wrote and wrote for 2 years, and after 2 years of writing lots of drafts, eventually I managed to get the script in shape, and I made the film. And the film was selected for the Director's Fortnight at the Cannes Film Festival last year in 2013. And it had, you know, the kind of success that I was quite surprised by. I think I always thought that the film was very culturally specific. I always thought that the film is very much rooted in Singapore culture. But it was at that premiere, that full house premiere of 800 people in Cannes, when I realized how universal the film was, when people were crying and very moved, and there was a 15-minute standing ovation, and it was electrifying. You know, later on it was very unexpected as well, but such a lovely moment when the film won the Camera d'Or for Best Debut Feature, preceded by a filmmaker, of course, that I respect a lot, Agnes Varda. I think that changed the whole fate of the film as well. The film has been very well embraced by festivals and programmers and critics all over the world. The film has been sold to 25, 30 over countries around the world. The film has won a lot of awards after Cannes, over 30 awards. I didn't expect that at all. Especially it's such a humble, such a delicate, such a small film. It's not a film, you know, I think when I was making the film, there wasn't such lofty ambitions. It wasn't about, oh, we want to make how much money from the box office, or we wanted to win awards with this film. It really came from a very, very honest, personal place. Thanks, Philip, for your question. I'm not sure if, you know, I love Ozu. You know, he is a filmmaker that I admire a lot. But I'm not sure if my film is directly influenced by him. I would say that there are a whole bunch of filmmakers that I really like, including Ozu, including the Taiwanese filmmakers like Edward Yang, like Ho Xiaoxian, like Ang Lee. In recent years, I'm a huge fan of the Korean filmmaker Lee Chang-dong. I think it's very hard to try to pin down influences, because a lot of times I don't believe that, you know, I go into a film saying, oh, I want to make a film like Ozu, I want to make a film like whoever. I think you sort of go in wanting to make a film, and what you've seen before and everything that has informed either your education as a filmmaker, you know, sort of, you know, it comes in a subconscious way. I feel that influence is something which most of the time comes when critics or members like yourself actually identify certain things which are recurring, which sort of make sense, and that's when I think, oh yeah, maybe I'm inspired or influenced in a certain way. Yeah, I find it really hard to ascertain my influence. And what is interesting is that, you know, I was trained in Singapore, which is in Asia, and then later on I was trained in the UK. In fact, now I'm still living in London in the UK. So even in Cannes, some of the jury members were saying, oh, you know, there is a hint of British social realism in Ilo Ilo. So is that because you were trained in the UK and you were influenced in that way? So a lot of the Asians actually see a certain sense of European filmmaking in my film, while the Europeans would see a sense of, oh, there is a strand of, you know, Asian sensibilities that you recognize in Japanese cinema, they recognize in Taiwanese cinema. Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm not sure I'll actually, you know, have the answer for you, but I am a fan of Ozu, and I do see myself as capturing and observing life. I think in a way that he does as well. It's a very interesting question. Thank you, Liza, for asking this question. I'm not sure. Yes, you know, a lot of times people sort of feel like I made a film like Ilo Ilo, which is very much social political, and it's an observation of society at a certain time and place. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm an activist filmmaker. I'm not sure I make films that are issue based. I'm not sure I just want to make films because of certain social concerns. I think eventually my filmmaking always stems out from human emotions, human interactions. I remember when I was doing my promotional tour in France, a lot of the French critics were saying, oh my god, how did you make this film? The film talks about so many issues. It talks about, you know, about family, of class, of growing up, of economic recession, of migration, about so many different things. And I feel you can't make a film about issues, and you can't make a film about so many things. I think what you can make a film about, it's about human interaction, it's about human emotions, and I always think I care more about my characters, and that's where my filmmaking stems from. And when I try and capture a certain honest or authentic portrait of certain people, this is what will come out eventually. I think the social issues and the other layers of society actually emerge in the film, because these characters and people, they're entangled in these issues all the time. But I would usually be quite wary about starting a film based on, oh, I want to make a film about this issue. I think it can be quite dangerous, because you might be blindsided. What advice I would give to young directors who are making their first feature film? Oh, actually, I have lots of advice. I remember at a festival in Kiev in Ukraine last year, I actually did a class on 10 things to look out for when making your first feature, but I'm not sure I remember all the 10 things now unless I fish out a PowerPoint. But the key things are this: I think it's important to make that film only when you're ready, not rush into it for the sake of rushing into it. It's important. That being said, it means that the script is really in shape before you shoot. It's important that you are yourself mentally ready. If you feel it's not time, it's not time. You will know when it's the time. If you need to make more short films, you should make more short films. If you need to work on a few other feature films, as an assistant or as an AD or something like that, you might have to do that. I think it's very important to budget well. In that sense, I don't mean like use a lot of money. I think it's very important to keep to rein in the budget so that you have a lot of freedom. But it's important that I don't quite believe in, oh, let's spend $100 and let's just take a video cam and let's just shoot something over the weekend. I think if you want to make a first feature that people want to see, that could go to festivals, that could have proper distribution, then you have to ask yourself, would you pay what, $10 or the amount of money you might pay to buy a ticket to see that film? So it needs to have proper production values. I don't mean it needs to look very expensive or sleek or all that, but it needs to feel like this is a proper serious film, and it's not just another student project. I think casting is important. For me, I always think casting makes up 50% of your performance. You find the wrong person and that's it. I think last but not least, it's the team. I think making that first feature is very scary at times because this is your first time. If you're working with a lot of other professional people that work on a lot of films, they will tell you, oh, you don't know what you're doing, or we've done this so many times. I think there'll be a lot of people who are sort of questioning your strengths and questioning if you really have what it takes. So it's important to have a team on your side. It might be people that you work with together in film school. It might be a DP, an editor. It might be a producer that you used to work with. It might just be a few people, but these are the people who, in the toughest of times, will help you to get through to the finish line. And that's what you want. You want to finish that first feature. When people stop believing and people stop giving you what you want, these are the people who would fight for you. And I think it's very important on the first feature because you have nothing to prove. You can't prove that you have made a lot of money from your films. You can't prove that your films have done well or been successful. So what you need is people that are gonna follow your vision and support you all the way.